Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. It's my honor, my privilege to be interviewing the rather wonderful Leslie Ann Jones. Now, we have tried to do this interview since 2019.
Yes.
And luckily, my rather wonderful wife standing over there, Karsha, has managed to facilitate this, make this happen. So thank you ever so much for coming out.
Oh, it's great. I'm glad we're finally able to make this happen. I've only been to Abbey Road when I was road managing an all-female rock band called Fanny. And this was
Wow, I didn't know that.
And this was probably in 76, 77. They were opening for Jethro Tull.
Yeah.
And I was road managing and mixing their sound. And they were assigned to EMI, and of course we got a tour of Abbey Road. And that's the only time I've been there.
Fanny were out now, they'd be one of the biggest bands in the world.
Oh, I'm sure.
Now that the landscape's changed.
Yes, totally.
For anybody who doesn't know who they are, go and check them out. Just be really blunt. Close your eyes, listen to the music. Some of the best music you've ever heard.
Yeah, and there's actually a wonderful film about them that's out as well.
Are you in it?
Documentary.
Documentary? Are you in it?
Yeah, a tiny bit.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you did that, or I went over my head.
My girlfriend was playing drums for them because it wasn't the original Fanny. So it was, June was out of the band by then, and it was Patty Quattro on guitar. Gene Millington was still playing bass. My girlfriend Cam Davis was playing drums. I don't remember who was playing keyboards then. That was the band then. And so I was always hanging around rehearsals and, kind of doing their sound and stuff. And their manager said, well, why don't you just come with us? And then I ended up being road manager and sound mixer.
And front of house.
Yeah.
Yowza.
Scared the hell out of me, the rake of the stages.
Yeah.
In the theaters. And I was then afraid of heights. And it was like, just going up there to where the consoles were. It was like, oh my God. And opening for Jethro Tull, that was
incredible, yeah.
Crazy. It was actually probably in 1973 because it was just before I got my first job as in a recording studio. And when they hired me, I told them that I had a commitment to go to, the UK for this tour, and that I would start after that. And so,
what was that first recording studio job?
ABC Recording Studio, part of ABC Records, which was owned by, of course, ABC TV. And they had ABC Dunhill had Steely Dan, and they had Jim Croce, and then they ended up buying this wonderful jazz label, Impulse. And so they had a lot of fantastic jazz artists.
How did you start off there? As assisting, running, straight into engineering? What was the...
I started off there. They had a tape duplication room. Okay. In those days, the mastering engineer would make what's called an EQ copy, which was a tape copy that had all the EQ and compression that he or she, it was usually he, had done to make the record. And then you would make a copy of that and send that to different countries. And of course, as you know, the European countries had a different curve for their reproduction than the American curve. So you would have to make copies of those tapes and send them, and they'd send them off to, all the European countries, Japan and all of that. And then huge cassette duplicators, because at that time, all the, executives and stuff listened to things on cassettes. So you'd be making, 50 cassettes, and my shift was 4 p.m. to midnight. And that's what I did until the assistant engineer on a project, the time for the project changed. And he didn't want to change his schedule because he didn't live close by and would be hitting lots of traffic. And so I raised my hand, and that was my...
So what gig was that?
It was a Michel Polnareff, who was a French singer. They were mixing his album, so I got to assist on that for first time.
Where did that lead to from there?
Well, I did that, and the ABC had some wonderful staff engineers, both African American. Barney Perkins, who is just incredible, and Reggie Dozier, who was Lamont Dozier's brother. They both did a lot of the R&B stuff that was going on, and I got to assist them and learn so much about R&B. And everything then, of course, was live musicians, live tracks, wonderful arrangers, all of that. Everything was done at the same time. And I assisted on a John Mayall record, and then when he came back in, he wanted me to be the engineer. At some point, I asked him why, of all the people he could have engineering for him. That's funny. The guy that was engineering for him would come in all dressed in a sport coat and a turtleneck and, loafers and all that. And, he said, I liked the fact that you could get on your knees and fix a tape machine. I mean, at that time, of course, you had 24-track machines, and if something was out of alignment, you'd have to, open up the machine and, turn knobs and stuff. And I think he really kind of liked that.
Absolutely,
that work ethic. And so that was my first mixing job, really, was a John Mayall album.
What type of music did you listen to?
I listened to a lot of R&B, folk music, singer-songwriters. The hardest rock, if you could even call it that, was, Supertramp, Pink Floyd, things like that I listened to growing up.
But for John to make his kind of rock, bluesy stuff, he was probably listening to the same music as you.
Probably so. Yeah.
So probably connected on that level as well. I think, they say like connects with like,
Yeah.
And I understand the work ethic thing. I have an English friend who said that he doesn't like working with, calls them white gloves, people that everything's a little bit too. He wants people to get in there and get down and dirty.
That's kind of what you have to do. You have to get your hands dirty in order to figure out what's going on or what the right thing is.
So John Mayall mixing an album, incredible. Where from there?
A number of records there, and then left ABC, and it was a weird kind of time. Where, at least in my generation, you kind of, if you wanted to get another studio job, you would get a job as an assistant, or you had to have enough kind of credits to be able to be hired as a staff engineer. And that was also kind of the era of the independent studios and independent engineers who had a long list of credits. I was sort of in this weird in-between place where I didn't want to go back to being an assistant engineer, but I didn't quite have enough credits. And so I was doing a lot of live sound. And then Mix Magazine at that time had a list of recording studios, and I had always wanted to live in San Francisco. And I just happened to look at their list of studios, and the Automat had just opened in San Francisco, and Fred Cotero was listed, the late Fred Cotero was listed as being the chief engineer. Fred had done Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holy Company, Blood, Sweat and Tears, all these bands that I just loved. And I saw his name, I thought, well, what the hell, I'll just send my resume up there. And they were the only ones who called me.
That's a story that resonates with a lot of people, that the last one they expect to actually say yes.
Yeah.
Is actually the one that says yes. They can put out 50 resumes, and that's the one I really want, but there's no way I'll get that. Yeah. It's a great lesson, and you just have to try.
Totally. You never know what's going to happen. And I think that they didn't really know what they needed, because it was the old CBS San Francisco studios. David Rubinson, who owned the Automat, wonderful producer, manager. He produced and managed Herbie Hancock and the Pointer Sisters and a lot of very important acts. He had just taken over the whole complex because they were going to close it, and he would have lost his studio, so he took over the whole complex. So now they had a huge tracking room, another wonderful tracking room, a mastering studio, a production room, and then David's studio. So I figured, well, at least I knew what I was capable of doing. And I thought, well, that's fine. I'll go up and I'll be an assistant. And if somebody needs strings, I'll just raise my hand because I know how to do strings, And that's kind of what happened. I got to assist Fred, and he's just a fantastic engineer. And I had already been, one of my biggest mentors was Roy Halley, who was a contemporary of Fred's. And Roy used to tell these fish stories about CBS San Francisco and these huge patch bays that covered the wall. And there I was in that same studio looking at that patch bay.
Oh, that's been incredible.
Yeah. So I got to assist Fred, and then I started doing sessions with Herbie myself. And, David liked to really kind of develop new artists, so I got to engineer them. It was my first experience with what was then called women's music. There was a group of women that were singer-songwriters recording their music, women-owned labels, women distributors, music festivals that were all women. And it was my first experience with that. And I got to record some of the, most important women in that group, Holly Near, Chris Williamson, and that was just a fantastic part of my career, because it also combined the politics of that time, women trying to be independent and not have to worry about the gatekeepers of that time, and really everything was done by them. There was a whole distribution network across the country that were women only. And of course they distributed other records, but so I was able to do that. At the Automat, I did the first digital multi-track recording that was
What machine was that?
The 3M.
Oh, the 3M
machine.
Right, okay.
Yeah, with it was a Carlos Santana record. It was a jazz record where he had Tony Williams on drums and Ron Carter on bass. Wow. A lot of the guys I had worked with who played with Herbie. And it was just a fantastic album.
When we first met you at the Tech Awards in 2019, I think it was.
Yeah,
You
maybe.
had got probably a Lifetime Achievement Award,
Yeah.
but also so did Herbie, didn't it?
Yes, he. I was lucky enough that he agreed to present the award to me, and
it was a great moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's. We could talk about Herbie for ages if you want. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan for obvious reasons. When you're working with that kind of level of player, it's interesting because I remember talking to Al Schmidt about this, and Al was like simultaneously a little overwhelmed working with incredible jazz musicians, the best players in the world, but also at the same time balance between the focus and the fear.
Yes.
And
yes. Yes, I know that well. It's interesting to hear that Al felt that way as well, because you never think of somebody like Al, just walks in, strides in, and turns a couple of knobs and everything sounds great. The rest of us have to work our butts off. I know that feeling well with artists. Working with Herbie was a little different because it was so much kind of jazz and just playing. And then David, who was a consummate producer, would just kind of let them go. And then we would actually put the records together by editing the multitrack. And because all these sections were so long and just jamming and stuff, and David would just kind of visualize what the tune should actually sound like. And we do it by cutting the 2-inch tape.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
What albums are we talking about?
Mr. Hand was done like that. That was one of the records that I did. Herbie was just a consummate not only musician, but technologist in terms of, what was next in terms of keyboards and sequencers and things like that. So you got exposed to all kinds of things, I also, when I was at the Automat, was lucky enough to work on the score for Apocalypse Now. That was the first film that I had done. I did a lot of work with Rosemary Clooney, Michael Feinstein, and these are folks that just, they just come in. They have great bands, great arrangers. They just sing, and you you have to be ready for anything. And I still remember to this day, Diana Krall was playing on a Rosemary Clooney session, and I had mic'd the piano with my favorite mics at the time, and Diana did a solo, and I just kept thinking to myself, God, I hope the mics don't distort. You know, I hope I had the preamp set right and everything, and that I wouldn't have to redo it again because of me, you know? And thank God it was just perfect. And she played such a great solo. But those are the moments that you think, oh, you know, I hope I've done everything right to leave enough headroom for something so that you can just experience what the art is that's happening.
Sounds like you need a sort of just enough level of fear so you don't become complacent.
Yes, and I find now in my career that I think my biggest enemy is complacency. That, you know, I try very hard not to just use the same things I've always used that have always worked. I try things that are perhaps a bit different, because if not, you know, I kind of, if somebody was talking yesterday about the little girl or little boy in you that gets so excited about something. And I think at this point in our careers, we still want that level of excitement when we work. And so, you know, I try very hard now not to be complacent and just go for the same stuff, which is probably why I take on so many challenging projects that I probably have no business doing. But, you know, somebody asked me, so sure.
You touched on your first film score being Apocalypse Now. Did that snowball, or was that just like a little taste of what to come?
It was just it was really because David was producing the music for it. And so I ended up doing that. And then I didn't really do anything for film for quite a while. Until I got to Capitol Studios and we started doing film scores and TV scores and things.
When was that? When did that start?
David closed the Automat and I was independent for a couple of years. And my friend David Cole, he and I shared work on Frankie Beverly and May's albums, big R&B group that was signed to Capitol. And David was had graduated from the studio to being A&R. And he had recommended me for a job at Capitol Studios. Well, I interviewed and all of that, and they decided not to hire at that time or whatever. And so, I don't know, 6-9 months later, I, you know, just decided I would start looking for another staff job, because I've always been very comfortable as a staff person. And so I thought, well, what the heck, I'll just call down there. And so I called and just to check and see if the same people were there. And like, funny you should call, because we have that job open and you've already done all the interviews, and why don't you come down and interview one more time? And they hired me. So, you know, it goes back to, you know, what you said about, you know, you never know. You know, you have to,
Yeah.
you know.
The overused quote about was it Wayne Gretzky, you know, you always miss the ones you don't take, you know.
Yeah, totally.
Something like that. I'm sure I messed that quote up.
So that's how I got the job at Capitol.
That's wonderful. And then what was the sort of career from there? What was the first stuff you worked on?
Oh, golly. I don't really remember what I worked on first. And Capitol was just a fantastic place to work. In fact, there were 4 of us last night at the party from Capitol, so we had a picture taken.
Beautiful.
Myself, Steve Jenowick, Peter Dell, and Dan Thompson, we had all worked together at Capitol. And it was just a fantastic place. And it was also interesting because, you know, I would still assist, but I would go from being an assistant one day to being the first engineer the next day, and then back to an assistant. And you kind of learned to be humble, you know, and not always want what you didn't have, you know. So, and that happened to all of us. We all You know, the goal, of course, was to be engineering so much that you couldn't assist anymore. But when you were assisting, you just had to be the best assistant you possibly could. And we were doing a lot of film and TV, and that was a whole other language. So I ended up taking an extension class at UCLA on film sound so I could understand the language and kind of the process of recording film sound from beginning to end, and that way I could communicate with my clients better and I could speak their language. And that was incredibly helpful. And then I was doing a lot of big band stuff with Rosemary Clooney, Michael Feinstein, a wonderful arranger, Peter Matz, who I had admired since I was a kid, actually.
Oh, wow. How did you know his music when you were a kid?
Well, I knew his music because my mother was a singer, and she had the original 8-track tape recorders in her car. Not tape recorders, but the Muntz 8-track machines, which had the cartridges that you would play. And she was, of course, a wonderful singer, but she was also a fan of great singers. And so I got exposed to Barbra Streisand and Mel Torme and, you know, all these, and Frank, you know, all these people whose all you need is one name. And Peter had done one of my favorite arrangements on a Barbra Streisand album, Any Place You Hang Your Hat Is Home. So when I got to work with him the first time, it was like, you know, it just pinched me. You know, I should be paying you to sit here and work with him. And he was just the most wonderful arranger. I later became very good friends with he and his wife and his family. So I just had some great experiences. Got to work with Marcus Miller on a film called White Men Can't Jump.
I remember that. Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
Big film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I just spoke at a grammar school the other day for inner city kids in Oakland called Northern Light. And it's grammar school, and one of the kids asked me what films I'd worked on, and I mentioned that, and everyone, you know, and I was just shocked. These are, you know, kids in 6th and 7th grade and 8th grade, and they all knew that film, you know.
Oh, that is quite surprising.
Yeah.
I often have conversations with kids, you know, people, teens and even early 20s, and I think that they're going to understand what seems to me obvious cultural references, and it goes straight over their heads. So
Yeah, well, maybe it's because it's an inner city school and it was a story about basketball.
yeah,
I don't know, you know, maybe that's a stereotype, but, you know, I was just shocked.
The amount I know about basketball, you couldn't even write on the back of a postage stamp. So I think what I'm enjoying about your career story is this. It's putting lots of different pieces together. I think the phrase that comes up is like acquired knowledge, like, you know, from live sound, which is you know, you talk about that at the beginning. That's a discipline in itself, because, you know, talk about not having any redos. You're in fear of the piano solo, and maybe you did one click too much on the preamp. So if they start digging in, it's going to distort. You know, that all of that, put that together with, you know, trying to make sure it doesn't go into feedback at any minute. And
yes.
all together really shapes your abilities. I feel like, you know, the idea of mixing on your own, for instance, seems quite low pressure, doesn't it? Because you don't have all those things. But I think that you need all of those things. You know, you need all of that acquired knowledge to get in there and be able to get from A to B, because I've never mixed film properly. You know, I've not mixed orchestras mixed in with, you know, band and program stuff and you know, voice and everything. And my gut is that if you put that in front of me, I would probably spend 5 times too long doing it. And it's all that acquired knowledge that becomes powerful. So that long waffling on is to really ask that question. When you were first presented with, you know, I suppose in those days, maybe 2 24 tracks synced together, you know.
Or one.
Or one.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of like the worst case scenario of multiple tracks.
Yeah.
And deadlines, of course, in film, which are with massive budgets compared with records.
Yeah.
That must have been quite scary.
I suppose so. There's 2 parts to it. There's the technology.
Yep.
And there's the act of actually doing it. And You know, I think the kind of scary part about it is that there's an enormous amount of money involved. There's huge orchestras, a lot of people. If something fails, you know, somebody's on the hook for a lot of downtime. And so there's a lot of checking and rechecking.
It seems like it's career continuation or career over if you've suddenly, they've gone in for 4 days and they're tracking a massive orchestra and then it's like, oh no, that
Yeah.
didn't work. You're
Well, I think it might be career over, or at least with that particular, you know, composer, if you weren't able to get the sound that they wanted, or things weren't proceeding, you know, at a good enough pace because you had to keep moving microphones or changing microphones or something like that. You know, you pretty much really have to know what's going to work, and then just go from there. Andrew Watt was saying in his keynote yesterday, I guess, about the difference between being fast and being quick.
yeah.
And it's the first time I'd ever heard that comparison of those two. And I think in you know, our world of doing film or doing big orchestras for scores or anything like that, you do have to be quick. It's not about being fast. It's about being quick and enabling the process to happen, you know, because there's a certain amount of music that has to get recorded in a 3-hour session. The musicians get a 10-minute break every hour, you know? So there's a lot of pressure on you to make sure that everything happens. Plus it has to sound good. Oh, by the way, you know?
That resonates. I know with assistants, I'll always say, you know, if it takes you 2 minutes longer to do the patch, but we're not spending half an hour trying to figure out what the problem is,
Yes.
Much rather do that. So yeah, that makes sense with the fast versus quick, yeah. I never get impressed with it took 30 seconds quicker to patch in that compressor.
No.
You know, I wouldn't notice, but I would certainly notice if it wasn't quite in and something was out of phase and I'm sitting on a mix trying to figure it out. I've had that happen before, and it's just because a patch wasn't fully in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the reverb only is out of phase, but you listen to a full mix going, this feels really uncomfortable. Yeah. So I know exactly what you mean.
And mostly that 30 seconds quicker probably means that it's patched in the wrong place.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
That all of a sudden you hit the insert button and nothing happens, and you wonder, and it's oh, I patched it in the other channel, you know, and so.
And then you're trying to figure out which is the other channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. I mean, so obviously people are going to know your name associated, of course, with Skywalker. In our world, let's be honest, there's probably not a single person watching this as a producer, engineer, or mixer that doesn't dream of that being one of the sort of ultimate gigs.
Yeah.
But it is funny. I've done TV stuff where I've gone in with bands, and the TV mixer, he's sitting there and he's making, you know, a massive wage. It's consistent work. It always seems the grass is always greener on the other side. I've met film people that are like, oh, I really want to just do bands. And then those of us who do bands are like, no, we want what you do.
You're very correct about that. You know that.
So you still yearn for sticking some mics up and tracking something, you know, a little bit more loose and.
Well, you know, since I'm producing more, I really kind of enjoy it when I'm just an engineer. You know, and I can sort of at 5 o'clock, I can say bye, you know, and I can go home and I don't have to worry about it. Yeah. But I mean, there's, you know, certain artists that I would love to work with. But for me, I'm very lucky I ended up where I am, and I can't think of any place else I would rather be.
How did you end up there?
Once again, Mix Magazine came to my rescue. I was
God bless you, Mix Magazine.
I was at Capitol. And I was getting close to my 9th year there. And I just wanted something different. And I had been engineering and producing. I was putting in a lot of hours. And I just kind of wanted something different. And there was a interview with the woman that was running Skywalker at the time, Gloria Borders. And she was talking about the scoring stage, and that her next challenge was to get the scoring stage to live up to its potential. And I saw that and I thought, well, you know, I still had my house in San Francisco, in Oakland, and had rented it while I was gone at Capitol. And I'd always wanted to go back to the Bay Area because that really felt like home to me. And so, you know, I called a couple friends I knew that were working there and, you know, just kind of checked it out, and then, you know, reached out and went up for an interview. And I think, I don't think I still to this day don't think they hired me because I was a recording engineer or a producer. I think they hired me because of my film contacts, and they wanted to make more connections on the film side for the scoring stage so that we could get in more scoring work. So for the first couple of years I was there, I was hardly in the studio at all. I was just running the scoring stage and booking and talking to clients and you know, managing the staff. And then...
I think they hired you for the full package.
Well, they might have, but...
I'm sure they did.
At some point, you know, Kronos Quartet recorded there quite a bit, and Judy Sherman is their longtime producer. And I would go down and visit them, you know, all the time. And the engineer that she had been working with at Skywalker was no longer there. And so this kind of light bulb went off, and she said, well, why don't you engineer for us? And then I was doing both things. And I was, you know, spending probably more time in the studio than in my office, and that, you know, working with Kronos kind of started my the resurgence of my
What year was
career. Oh, I started in '97 at Skywalker, and so that was probably around '99.
It seems, at least from the outside, as a dream job.
It is, actually. You know, it's really all about what you make of it. You know, I took the job. I had never run a studio before, but I had certainly worked for enough studios that I knew the difference between good studio managers and bad studio managers. And, you know...
Before you move on, can you elaborate on that?
Well, in terms of people that were more responsive to their staff, and, you know, allowed growth opportunities. And then those people that just didn't really care and just wanted to get the bookings in and the money and, you know, all that, and wouldn't invest the time necessary and or the money necessary. And so I was very lucky when I came into Skywalker, because we had to make some significant equipment changes, and I was lucky enough to be given the green light to do all of that, with the purpose of, you know, what Gloria wanted was to let the scoring stage live up to its potential. We had to do certain things. We had to hire certain people. And, you know, one of the things at Capitol you learned was, you know, one day you were doing a film score, the next day you were doing a rock record. And you learned that you needed a staff that knew both and could do both and could understand syncing machines and digital transfers, and the staff really didn't exist at that time. So I was able to bring up Dan Thompson from Capitol, brought up Aaron Reef as our first tech, and was really, and I didn't think about it at the time, but I feel like I was able to shape the scoring stage to reflect my own aesthetic about how sessions should be run, how clients should be treated. If I have any legacy at Skywalker, I would say that's what it is, you know. No matter who you are, no matter how you got there, everybody's treated the same way, whether you're a big artist or you know, got a second mortgage on your house to make a record. And, you know, that's, I think, what makes it such an exceptional place to work. And that's true on the film side as well. Whether you're making documentaries or you're making the next Star Wars movie, everybody's treated the same way, you know? And I think that's truly the mark of a great studio.
I agree. Very much so. I love what you're talking about, the career advancement thing, because that has been something I've seen at all levels. from being in that position to also having control over destiny sometimes. And it's a really difficult thing to do because everybody, of course, wants to climb that ladder as quickly as possible. But you're quite often dealing with people that there's a lot of potential, but they're just not ready for it yet, and that's a very difficult thing to manage, isn't it? And they'll end up working the insane hours that we do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you have many stories of all day and all night trying to get something out for a deadline. As it feels like all of us do in this industry. I've had assistants and stuff work those kinds of hours, and that's wonderful, but they haven't necessarily learned some of the skills to maybe move up to the next chair. It's, I think everybody's journey is different, isn't it? Sometimes it takes...
Yes.
What I love about your journey is, we were talking about earlier, is it's like pebbles building on top to create this mountain.
Yeah. I've been so lucky to have worked for some wonderful people and assisted some great engineers that I've, to this day, still take with me for every session I do. Some of the tools that I learned from them. Even now, I continue to love learning, to hear other people's experiences. And that's one of the things I've always loved about being a member of the Recording Academy and getting into certain, volunteer leadership positions in the Academy, was that, you and I don't work on the same kind of records. And yet your experiences and hearing about the kind of records you do, hearing about the kind of records other people do that work in genres that I would never work in, just because I wouldn't be a person somebody would call for those genres. But hearing their experiences, you really kind of understand that everybody's kind of going through the same stuff, and I love being able to learn about that.
Do you feel, talking to maybe people that are up and coming, you still would be able to achieve the things that you've achieved if you were outside of a system and you just had the drive and the ambition, given the tools that people have these days?
Oh, God, that's a tough question.
I've never asked that of anybody with your kind of level of experience before, and I've never heard anybody with your level of experience answer a question like that. But I think if I was 18, I might be watching this going, I love her and I love her history, but can I repeat it? What do you think? I don't know the answer.
Well, I don't know the answer either, and I must say, I find it very difficult to talk to young people now, given the industry, given the kind of paths that are available to them, and then looking how we came up and trying to reconcile the two. It's impossible for me to answer, first of all, whether I would have been able to achieve the same level of success if I started out now, because the opportunities that I found myself with really don't exist now. It's really a question about, and I totally agree with you that you can't be taught, you can only learn. Even if you graduated from a recording school and somebody's taught you something, you still have to, you might be taught about a compressor and what it does, but until you actually have one in your hands and you're using it and learning about it, you don't have a clue, really. I think the opportunities are so different now, particularly with the kind of, full service people that are, look at somebody like Susie Shin. She writes songs, she produces, she engineers. She's taken all of that. And so if you wanted to be like you and I are, just career engineers and producers, the path these days, without those resources being available, is much harder. And I always suggest to people now to find someone who is a composer, who is a songwriter, who is a singer, who's an artist, and become the person they can't live without, because you are helping to enable them to achieve the success that they want to achieve, because you know things that they don't know and you know how to do that. Our business is based so much on personal relationships.
Yep.
And now that's even more important. I see so many kids now, back to this grammar school I spoke at, one young man came up to me and said, "How much money do you make doing what you're doing?" You know? And that was his concern about making money. And of course, as we know, you don't make a lot of money in the beginning, you know? And you're working long hours and
You might just make rent for the first few years.
exactly,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
know.
you have to really love what it is that you're doing and be committed to it. And if you're not, then you should go find something else. That love of what you're doing, the love of music, that commitment to your art, and being able to allow others to achieve their potential and their art. That's really what it's about these days. I think it's a different a different approach than it was when we were starting out. And you know, so that's really kind of what I suggest to people, because those studio jobs are few and far between. Everybody's got a long list of interns.
This is a fan kind of question. I like these ones. And I remember asking Al and Steve Genuick these kinds of questions. Is there a particular project that stands out, that's especially meaningful or transformative for you? Something that is just...
That's so hard to answer because, you know, I've been lucky enough to work on so many incredible projects and other things that have led to other things, and some projects that have been very challenging. I, I, I can't really cite one of them because there have been so many, from being in the studio recording with Steve Vai, who's been a friend of mine for many, many years, and we never got a chance to work together. And then I sat in a studio and listened to him re-record his guitar parts for Halo for their 25th anniversary, working on a piece written by a wonderful composer, Laura Karpman, with words by Langston Hughes. And it's a project called Ask Your Mama. And it's based on a book of poems by Langston Hughes, where in the margins of the book, he talks about the type of jazz music he was thinking about during that. And Laura, brilliant as she is, took that and completely wrote a whole huge piece on that. And that was a piece I was involved in from the very beginning, where we first started workshopping it at the University of Michigan, to ultimately it being performed at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, at the Hollywood Bowl. And then we were able to record it as an album with the San Francisco Ballet Orchestra at Skywalker, and it won Best Engineered Classical Recording. So, you know, there are so many instances like that. It's really hard to point one out. I think the transformative part is the kind of journey. So without making this too long, I mentioned Peter Matz earlier. I got hooked up with a wonderful producer manager, Alan Sviridoff. And Alan produced and managed Rosemary Clooney. He produced and managed Michael Feinstein. Alan was also responsible as a producer for recording the music for a particular cruise line. Peter was doing a lot of the arrangements for those. Alan always used the best players, the best people. And these were theme shows, and they all had to be done, you know, very quickly. Great rhythm section, great orchestras, background singers, and of course, other singers would be singing those parts live on the ship. We were using DA-88s because of the track count, because, you know, it was really too much for analog, and we could just loop a bunch of DA-88s together and do this. And that work with Alan on ship shows, mind you, and Peter, led to me working with Rosemary Clooney and Michael Feinstein and doing all other kinds of big band work. And so I would say, you know, there are many points in my career that have been transformative just because of the situations I found myself in and being that person that other people couldn't live without them. And then, of course, I got taken along to other things that, you know, my career grew from. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to point to any one thing. There are just many instances like that that you find yourself in, and you just try to make the most of it and do the best job. And then all of a sudden you find yourself, you know, another rung up the ladder.
Where do you sort of see the future going? You know, what do you feel like with music? I know there's a lot of fear based around AI. I have very strong opinions about all modern technology, I feel like. And you've, you know, from the 70s through to now, you've seen, you know, all levels of,
Oh, yeah.
you know, coming in and stuff staying the course and falling by the wayside. I don't think any of us are foolish enough to believe that AI is going to disappear tomorrow. We know it's here to stay.
No.
What are your thoughts about it?
One thing to talk about AI is another thing to talk about the future. And, you know, yesterday I was talking to someone about AI and the music industry and about they need to sort of harness it. And I've been thinking lately about the kind of Napster days. And Napster, of course, was the first kind of service that, you know, made music available by streaming. There were all kinds of copyright issues, and I don't know, was this 20 years ago? When, you know, record labels were so fearful of it and tried to shut it down because they didn't really understand about how to embrace it. And instead of trying to, you know, it's so hard to see the future. And of course, you think of it as being so bad, and how are you going to make any money? And nobody's getting paid any royalties and all of that. So let's just shut it down. And then 20 years later, you know, there's Qobuz, there's Apple Music, there's Spotify, there's all of these, you know, and people have figured out a way to make money from them all, as little as it is. And so I think now about AI being kind of the Napster of now, where people are afraid of the detrimental parts of it. Certainly on an educational level, I think people are very worried about it, that it's going to be used as a crutch for people who won't do their own work and just use AI to come up with things. I think that perhaps people have learned their lesson and are now thinking about, well, how can we use it so that it helps us and is not, so it's an asset and not a liability. I'm hoping that that's what happens. I think that there does need to be guardrails put up in terms of its use or misuse, particularly in terms of, you know, songwriting and things like that. I mean, I can't imagine how AI would ever help me plug in a patch cord, you know? But it might certainly give me suggestions on what I might use for a particular sound that I'm looking for, you know? I mean, I look at AI now, I do, you know, a Google search on something and I get a whole list of kind of cliff notes now of what I was looking for. Not just links like we used to, you know, 5 years ago, but actually a distillation of what I'm looking for. And sometimes that's just enough for me. And sometimes there's more that I can go to. I love that.
I do too, actually.
You know, and to me, that's not cheating or making me not do my homework.
Sort of what I expected the internet was supposed to be in the first place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, I don't know what the future is going to be, but I think I'm just happy that I feel like, you know, and it sounds, I don't know, a bit condescending. Well, people have learned their lesson, but I think that the history of Napster and streaming and what it has ended up being as such a positive thing for artists, I'm hoping that's what will happen with AI, where 5-10 years down the line, it has, you know, changed things so much for the better because we embraced it and put up some guardrails.
Well, thanks for taking the time on that.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm so glad it worked out.
This has been amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.